Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, we have author Ryan D. Meier with Shadows of Creation. You're going to love these chronicles. Thank you for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing really great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So you're calling in from upstate New York by Skype. How's the weather today?
It's hot. It's been hot, but we won't complain about that because we saw plenty of cold this winter, so we're happy to have it. I'm not complaining against the heat yet. Give it a few more months.
Oh, that's good. All right. So tell me how you came up with this novel or this whole series. It deals with redemption, social injustice. I like how you twisted economics into it. What's your background?
Well, yeah, so I do have a bit of an interesting background that's maybe a little bit different than the normal fantasy author. I have a bachelor's in business management, and I spent a couple decades in a mix between retail management and then finance. So although I've scaled that back a little bit now, a lot of my education had a lot to do with economics, big business, that sort of thing. And I think when you combine that with a lot of what we're looking at today, with whether it's the financial inequality or a lot of the talk that we have around a quality minimum wage and all of these very relevant conversations, I think it was important when I did the planning for this book and the series itself that I make sure I bring some of that to light. I'm a big believer that fantasy, although we live in different worlds with it and the characters may not even be human, I think in a lot of the stories, humanity shines through anyway, right? So even if it's an elf instead of a human, I would imagine in those far off worlds, they deal with a lot of the same things that we deal with here.
Definitely.
You know,
and I loved how you played the redemption part into it, especially with the kidnapping that went wrong. How did you come up with that angle?
So it's funny, when I was doing the planning, I had several novels, including The Kept King, which was my second publication. I had several of them outlined before I really settled down to choose the one that I was going to focus on first. And it ended up being Shadows for maybe an odd reason, considering a lot of the things that I worked in. My children, my oldest is 14 and my youngest is 7. And it was really important to me to write something initially that I would be able to share with them right off the bat. So I'd had this idea, which is a coming of age fantasy story that's really written for anybody between 13 and 103, right? So it's fairly clean. It's going to be reminiscent of things like The Wheel of Time because it's much more of a journey for the characters, right? And of course there's magic and there's a lot of things mixed in. But that's why I wrote it. I wanted it to be something that I could share right away with my children. So when it came to the initial idea about a kidnapping, it was much more about a kidnapping gone wrong. So I don't know what initially got me thinking about that. But a very small plot line that provides really no spoilers is the fact that one of the elven princess, somebody that she knows, has planned a kidnapping for their own reasons. And it's not meant to be menacing. It's much more of like a, let's make it look like there is a big attempt on your life when really we're maybe looking like the heroes.
Right.
rather than so we can swoop in and save the day. How's that sound?
Right.
But then I thought, that there's not enough excitement in that. So it quickly turns from the kidnapping gone bad into I guess you could call it a high horsepower chase, right? So I thought that was an interesting way to open the door to what is a much bigger world, because that's really only a very small percentage of the plot.
It is. The war scenes were well done. The way the story plays out has a lot to do with, I think, world history and things that go wrong with, different countries, even though it's in the world of fantasy. But I like the parallel, the horror of death that you depicted. It was really well done. It kept me up late so many nights. I couldn't put it down. And it was really clean, which was nice because it just centered more on the storyline. We could concentrate more on the storyline and the injustices that were happening and the wrongness of it. The way that we build people up, and like a monumental kind of way, that was really well played out. I loved it. It was just such an incredible story. It was like, oh, wow, you're an idiot. And, will this guy come around? It's like, is he going to do the right thing? Like, you could almost, you kept inching yourself towards it. Like, I want to believe he's going to be good. I want to believe it. And then, whether or not that happens, and you really kill us with the emotions. You bring us on a great roller coaster ride.
I think it was really important for me to make sure that all of my protagonists were flawed. I enjoy the fantasy that has one hero who saves the day, and I won't suggest that we necessarily might not find a happy ending at the end of the Creation Chronicles. But I thought it was important, even with the people who play the biggest role in the ending of the series, by the time we get to book 3, that these people are not going to be your atypical hero. They're going to make mistakes. They have checkered pasts. And I think even when it comes to Yuri, who's a high elven prince in the story, I hope that we're a little on the fence with him. Like, we're really searching, where is he going to go in his journey? And I think his storyline, which is, again, another minor storyline, I think it's most interesting because I almost pulled the reverse with him. I set him up, and you're leaning more towards maybe there's something amiss with him, and maybe he's not going to be the one to come to be the one to save the day. And I think it was important to instill that doubt in somebody that maybe you thought was bad who might become good, not just somebody who was good with some baggage or who makes bad decisions. So, I'm thrilled that you noticed that, because for me, so much of my focus went into the development of the characters. That was, I felt that although the story and the interactions between them would be very important, at the end of the day, when book 3 is read and you're at the end page, it's important that these characters, that it was less about the destination for them and much more about their journey as individuals.
Definitely. And you had magic. You had
it's an elemental magic system, so it's not anything groundbreaking. But I thought that was intentional as well. The magic, I didn't want the magic to feel like it were overwhelming the story. Again, this is a story, right, about characters and the decisions we make. And what we allow to happen to the world around us, and sometimes why we allow it to happen. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we're just focused on other things. So that's what I hope. That's what I hope to bring to the table with Shadows.
Yeah, well, the shadows in this, I thought, were really good. They centered around political corruption, a little bit of greed, the typical things, but and the dark side of human nature. So it had that magical part. It was gritty. It was hopeful and disappointing, for the characters, but not in the read itself.
Yeah,
the
sure.
read just kept you really tuned in and you wanted to find out what happened next. And I thought the chapters, the way you laid it out, were well developed. We felt like we might be able to take a break. And then we're just like, just one more.
Well, that's what you hope for, right? That even at the end of a chapter of a long session, that it still is drawing in. And well, when I went through the structure of what the book would look like, I found when I was picking, what style of writing am I going to use? I decided to go with third person, which I think has always been the most immersive for me when reading fantasy. And of course, that's what I wanted to bring. And as far as the point of views go, so one thing I'll say about what can make it difficult when you're managing the different protagonists. So for those who haven't read it, the way the book is written is you'll follow different protagonists through their different storylines, and then of course the idea is that they're intermingling as the plot moves forward. So it was important to me when I was able to write each character, I could write it in a linear way. So for instance, when I sat down and wrote Bren's part, I was for the most part able to write his chapters consecutively rather than writing the book linearly from the beginning. And I felt like that did a great job of keeping me focused in the character's mindset. So what I hope people see when they read it, and like you were saying, we're dealing with all of these different topics and several different personalities, is that by separating them and then writing it in that order, I hope that they would all feel very unique and be able to bring their own emotional attachment to the different perspectives. So that's another thing that I thought was really important, is that you can have two characters on the same side of one coin and they would be looking at it differently.
Yeah, I thought it played into the title really well, The Shadows of Creation, because there's all these elements about different types of people, different stations in life of people, and how they perceive situations. And they're all in the same situation sometimes, and the perception, how they react to it, how they handle it. It's just really incredibly well done.
Yeah, thank you. Another thing, there was a couple things another thing that I kind of wanted to tackle. I know that we always talk in the fantasy business, and readers too, right? Not just authors. We talk about tropes a lot, because tropes are a thing that can be, like, they're all necessary, right? When you look at, I know some people say, tropes, they're all overplayed, but really a lot of them are the core of what we love about fantasy. But I do always think it's important that sometimes we tweak them a little bit, or we play with them just to mix it up. So I'll give you a for instance, and I'll see if this jumped out at you. When you begin Shadows, the very first chapter follows an earth mage, a Bumai mage named Zyla. And the initial chapter opens up with her in a magical temple, which is, you're going to notice very quickly, is going to establish a magical school. So basically, this is where they train their magic users in this world. And what I thought was unique is I've always loved magical schools because they're so epic, right? Think about Harry Potter and how that world has just come to life. It's a theme park now, and it's just, every bit of it feels magical. It makes you feel like a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I think by attacking the magical school trope and turning it a little bit on its head. So Zyla, who is a magical student at this temple, does not enjoy her time there. She's bored. She is under challenged. A lot of the studying is not the cool magic that you or I would want to do. It's actually, as earth mages, they talk a lot about farming and how they use their magic to build their community. And then, of course, what fun would it be if we're going to follow a magical student into the world of field plowing, right? So obviously the story isn't headed that direction. But I wanted to give a different insight to the magical school in the sense that, Zyla is stuck in a magical school and then has to adventure pulls her out, right? And then the magical school is kind of behind us. But I thought it was interesting to approach that trope like that.
I did too. I like the backdrop of the school as you get to, after the main conflict and you getting towards the end and what's going to happen next. How one of the characters stayed back to look out for her and, take part in the rescue. The whole planning and, learning to be able to step back and not be the one in charge. That was key. I mean, there was a lot of really good points for young people. So I can see how you wrote it with your children in mind. But
I've always thought of fantasy as this type of fantasy, right? Because there's dark fantasy, like everybody's familiar with Game of Thrones, right? So we all love that. Some of us, I can't say all of us, right? I've always tended to read some dark fantasy. I love reading the Witcher series, and that's a Netflix thing now. But I think it is important that fantasy, when I look at the roots of fantasy, which is in fairy tale, right? That's the maybe look at like pre-Tolkien, because he kind of adapted the fairy tale into a much longer stretch. But I think when you look at fairy tales, at least in the way we've made them more modernly, they're not as grim, right? And it is focused on morals, almost like they can be parables. And I think that with fantasy that's designed for the coming of age crowd, so whether it's the young adult crowd, the people who have are in between adult and being more controlled. So I don't know, in my mind, I think it's important that we have those lessons involved. Adults, maybe it won't seem as important, but when you're an impressionable kid reading fantasy like I was, it made a world of difference to me. If you don't mind, I'll share. So I was a huge Dragonlance Chronicles fan growing up. And I don't know if you're familiar with those stories, but I always like to reference it as an important piece in building me as a writer, even though I was so young when I initially read the books. Tanis Half-Elven, who's a half-elf and half-human character, finds himself in the Dragonlance Chronicles feeling like he doesn't belong in either world, right? And when I read this as a young teenager in the early 90s, I grew up in an area with not a lot of diversity. That was my first experience stepping into the shoes of somebody in a story where I actually felt the emotion of that person's struggle with the fact that they couldn't fit in. And that has stuck with me so hard over the years. So, that's not that specific topic, of course, but that's what I think all fantasy should bring us. It should teach us how to be empathetic and compassionate with people when maybe our perspective doesn't allow us to feel that. But when we're in their shoes in the book, it really allows for that. And I think that's so important.
I do too. And I think that's what really drew me in, was that you had all these diverse characters who could, some of them who were never going to empathize with anybody. But you had other ones that you're like, please, like, you could make the right choice. And just the whole empathy, kindness, the thoughtfulness thinking of somebody else before yourself, and then, just sticking through, staying till the end. So I really want to see where it goes.
So I'm glad that you asked that. So let me give you a little bit of update. As of the last Friday, I completed Elements of Creation, which is the manuscript for book 2. So I'm in the editing process already, which is really exciting because I can't wait to share the next installment. So let me give you just a couple, maybe little tidbits to keep you curious. I know for those who haven't read it, Shadows brings you into the world of Tarina, and Tarina has 4 magical temples in it. So we focus on the Prithvi Temple, which is the Bumai, the Earth Magic Temple in Book 1. That's a central feature. But as I was designing the outline, it is critical for me that we hit all 4 magical temples, because it's not just the Prithvi Temple that is going to give you insight into how this world is. Where you are after finishing Book 1 gives you a pretty decent idea on how the Bumai function. With Book 2 and Elements, we're going to visit the Water Temple and the Fire Temple, which is going to be so cool for everybody to see that. Because if you look at the cover of Shadows, it has the Prithvi Temple, which is built onto a mountain. You're going to find that the other 3 magical temples, as the rest of the series plays out, has just as amazing of a landscape and feel to them. In fact, I would venture to say that they're a little bit more magical than the Prithvi Temple is. So it'll be a little bit more exciting than your introduction to begin with. So that we have to look forward to. The other thing is, I've gotten a lot of questions about whether or not my full arc for this show, or for this book series, is Christ-like, in the sense that, will there be, do we have a sacrificial character in the series? And that's been a big question for me. And I would say I wouldn't expect that. But I will say that some of the little pieces that you catch in Book 1 will play out in some semblance of truth when it comes out at the end. So some of the things that you're basking in now, you have much more to look forward to as the story progresses.
Now, how long have you been writing, and how many books have you written altogether?
Sure. I've been writing seriously, I would call it. I've been writing, for fun on occasion during different periods of my whole life. But I would think I started taking this really seriously 2.5 years ago. And then I've been trying to hone my routine and my daily writing as best I can since then. But so Shadows was my debut novel. Because I was new to the editing process. After I had finished writing Shadows, I wrote a full second book, The Kept King. So I actually wrote 2 books back to back, and they're separate. The Kept King is a standalone. And then I edited both. I edited Shadows first, released, edited Kept King, released, as I've been working on Elements. So I'm two published into books, with 3 coming up at the end of this summer.
Oh, good. Because you left us with a wicked cliffhanger at the end. I was like, oh, now I want to know. I just want the next book. Where is it?
That has been a critique I've taken, unfortunately.
We're just like, all this action, everything's going on. We think we're finally getting close to the resolution. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was really good. I like getting there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and the last thing about Elements 2 is, at the end, the big cliffhanger does have to do with one of our, it's like the development of our truly evil character for the rest of the series, if that's a good explanation for that. And if you thought it was cool at the end of Book 1, wait till you see what you have in store for you come the end of summer when it's available. Because it really takes that idea and goes on a run with it.
Wow. Are there any other series that you have in mind coming up?
Yeah, I'm going to be really diligent about finishing the Creation Chronicles, though. So I'm editing elements. I've already started writing the final book in the series, which it's too early to give the title away. I'm not sure yet. But another mix. So another thing I'll just add in real quick. I'm also halfway through writing a novella based on the series, because a big ask is one of the bad characters. I had a lot of questions about his backstory. So that'll be a small project. It'll be a novella, probably 80 pages, and that'll shed some light on that. So that's what I have to look forward to for the rest of 2021. I'll be writing a whole lot of Creation Chronicles. After that, 2022, I'll worry about that when I get there. But I do have several ideas on the burner. So
that's
plenty
great.
to go.
How many are going to be in the Creation Chronicles?
So that's going to be a traditional trilogy. It was designed like that from the beginning, and unless something really comes up and the story takes a life of its own, that'll be how it finishes. It'll be 3 books.
Oh, that sounds good. Well, this one was only, it wasn't that bad. It was only like 350, a little over 350.
Yeah.
So, but it was action-packed. It stayed with you long afterwards. If you take breaks, you're thinking about the characters. I mean, I literally took it everywhere with me for a couple of days so I could read it. I read it in like waiting in line, on breaks. I'm like, wait, I got to find out what happened. And you just try to squeeze like a whole chapter in, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and then sit down for a few hours straight, and you're just, gotta go, I gotta get it. But yeah, I love chasing the characters. I love trying to keep up with everything that was going on. It was so enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I hope everybody takes out of it what you've taken. It's when life knocks you down, get yourself back up and make the next step.
Definitely. It's all about choices. If you guys want a great series to give anyone of any age, Shadows of Creation by Ryan Meier, we'll definitely keep them tuned in. We'll see you soon.